Hey everybody, this is some Christian guy, and I welcome you back to my channel. You can find me on Facebook on oneway.com/media, and you can find me on YouTube as well. Now, today's subject, I want to talk to you guys about the question, am I or are you a potential addict? Now, what sparked the impetus to give this particular video or do this talk is on the there's a young man that I befriended some time ago. I actually met him on the streets, and he's an addict through and through. And as we all know, addictions completely ruin our lives, right? And just this past weekend, there was a bit of an incident and all that sort of thing, and the severity of these kinds of issues when a person is an addict, and how it percolates, the issue percolates throughout their entire lives. I'm basically now sitting at the point where I literally don't know if he's either in prison at the moment or if he's dead. That's basically how it is. So it's an absolutely devastating addiction. Of any kind is absolutely devastating, and some kinds of addiction more so than others. So for example, if you're addicted to cocaine, etc., etc., you know, the usual culprits, tends to have a much worse impact on your life than others. Say, you know, let's say you've got a bit of a sugar addiction, and you eat, you know, you're always eating cakes and things like that, which can happen, and so on and so forth. So this video is going to be useful for anyone that wonders, you know, do I have a personality that predisposes me to be an addict, right? And this is very useful for parents especially. And now my advice to parents is get to know your children's personalities. These days we have the knowledge and the technology that you can, and I'm going to show you just now a personality test, and we're going to go through the two main focuses on personality that are going to give you the best idea of whether or not the individual you are dealing with, whether it's yourself or a friend or family or a child, has that predisposition in them, right? And you can use this as a guideline, because if someone has these traits, then it will give you an idea of how you might want to deal with the individual, and sort of why this tends to predispose people to all that sort of thing. Now again, nothing is absolutely 100% settled question. You know, these are guidelines. Just because you might have X, Y, or Z doesn't mean you will be an addict. But if you do have these traits, then it's a warning that you don't even try, because these days a lot of people and a lot of parents have taken on the mentality that, you know, I'm happy if my kids experiment as long as they do it in the home and I know about it and all that sort of thing. And the fact of the matter is, if you're dealing with someone who has a proclivity for addictive behavior, right, then this idea, whether they try it without your knowledge or with your knowledge, is completely utterly irrelevant. It's actually a really naive position to take, because if this kid's going to get addicted, they're going to get addicted, whether they do it in the control of confinements of your own home or otherwise. And the fact of the matter is, if the child gets addicted under your own supervision, then they're not going to be in your home forever. Well, if they become addicted, they probably will. You'll never get rid of them because they're going to be completely dysfunctional. But they're not always going to be under your care. They're eventually going to go out into the world, and they're going to have to deal with these things themselves. So we want to have a bit of a chat about this particular issue, because it's really, really, really important. So what I'm going to do for you today is I'm going to show you, in terms of the personality trait test and trait theory, the big five. We've talked about this before in other videos, where if you do the test, there are two personality traits in particular that will give you the biggest indication as to whether you have this proclivity or not, and whether you should be careful. And here's the thing, right? You can be addicted to absolutely anything, and you need to get this straight. You need this to settle in your mind. The vast majority of the time, when we think of addiction, we think about alcohol and hard drugs. Okay? And whilst that is true, human beings can become addicted to absolutely anything which stimulates your dopaminergic reward system in your brain. Right. So what does this mean? When you consume something, or are involved in an event, right? It can be an event that gives you a dopamine hit. The dopamine goes into your brain, makes you feel alive, makes you feel very, very good. And it's a reward system, right? It's a biological reward system that is there, and it acts as a motivator, right? So, for example, if you didn't have the dopaminergic reward system, and you find it in animals, you find it in human beings, and all that kind of stuff. If you didn't have that, you would find that you have very little to no motivation to do anything, really, right? So, for example, food, eating a good meal. That's why we call it comfort food, right? Comfort food and food in general gives that. Not only not only is it dopaminergic, because the dopamine makes you want to get up and go look for something, right? And then there's also the serotonergic, which is the satisfaction, right? Once you've consumed, that's your consumatory reward. You consume and you're now satisfied. But dopaminergic, it makes you want to go out and look for this experience. It makes you pursue, right? Pursue a particular thing or a particular experience, and anything. So food does it, right? Experiences do it. So people that call themselves, for example, adrenaline junkies and stuff like that, basically what they're chasing is a dopaminergic hit. Okay, basically, right? They're not actually adrenaline junkies. They're dopamine junkies, more correctly speaking, right? Because that whole experience, depending on how you view it, again, the way you view things is also. So, for example, for someone, skydiving is an absolute blast, but for someone else it's utterly terrifying. Obviously, the person for whom it's utterly terrifying, they're not, the brain, the biological system is not predisposed, because of the way they perceive the thing, is not disposed to give you a dopaminergic hit on that particular thing. It's because it's going to do everything possible to make sure that you don't go do that, right? So that's basically what it is. So our comfort foods, all of our comfort foods, our sugary drinks, our sugary foods, our high fat foods, our high carbohydrate foods, all of those things will get you in the dopaminergic reward system, and so on and so forth. And which is why we have an obesity epidemic in the world, because there's nothing about self-control and all that kind of stuff. There's no self-control, no anything of these sorts of things. Do whatever you want, and people go and chase these things. Also because there's a lot of depression and a lot of anxiety in the world these days. In order to ameliorate the feelings of depression, anxiety, stress, etc., people go and look for the dopamine hit, because dopamine cancels out a pain state. Now, this is why, in a lot of ways, why we search for dopamine, for a dopaminergic hit or a dopaminergic event, is because dopamine is very, very effective at combating pain, right? Which is why if a person's been in surgery, etc., or if you've got whatever the case may be, you get things like morphine, and you get all your opiates and stuff like that, because those things, they kill pain. Now, here's the interesting thing. Your brain is not concerned with, it doesn't care whether the pain is a physical pain, like you've got an actual wound, or an actual, like a stomach ache, or a headache, or migraine, or whatever the case might be. It doesn't care whether it's a physical pain or whether it's a psychological pain, right? So you get psychological pain states. A pain state, right, is frustration, sadness, anger, loneliness, all of these kinds of things, all of those negative emotions. Those are pain states. And when people experience these things in an inordinately often way, you will find that these people tend to go and look for dopaminergic events and seek out dopaminergic events, in order, because what they're doing is they're literally self-medicating, as it were, because the dopamine hit ameliorates pain, especially psychological pain, which is why a lot of people, at the end of the day, when they want to unwind from stressful day at work, whatever the case might be, they go for alcohol, right? Because alcohol has that effect, and in some people the effect is significantly more potent than in others, which is why some people become addicts and some do not. It's all about the biology. right? And the thing is, a lot of people have recognized correctly that some people get addicted and some people don't. Someone can smoke for 20 years and one day decide, I'm not going to do it anymore, put down the cigarette, never talk about it again. And whereas others will struggle, it's like pulling, like pulling teeth, almost impossible for them to give up the cigarette. Why can the two people, why is there this disparity? And that's what I want to try and explain, because a lot of the time, and it's usually the idiots that bring this out, a lot of people be like, oh, well, not everyone gets addicted, therefore I can try it. Well, it's like, listen, moron, just because other people can get addicted doesn't mean you won't. Okay, and if you are the one that's going to get addicted, believe me, you're going to regret, you're going to rue the day that you ever tried it. Okay, so the impetus is not just in pleasure seeking. The biological mechanism is there in order to motivate you to do things, right? To eat, to have sex, all of the biological functions, which if you weren't motivated to do these things, you would obviously die. Okay, and various other things like that, you would obviously die. All right, but human beings, we go and we abuse that, and therefore we then become sex addicts, or we become substance abusers, and things of that sort. And for example, a person can be like crave attention, so getting the attention of other people gives them a dopamine hit, which is why they like to be social all the time. And for someone that is looking for dopamine, it doesn't matter whether the attention is positive or negative. Either way, it gives them so a person can either be a total douchebag and be like, oh, look at me, and be very social in that way, constantly getting the attention of people, whereas another person can play the victim. Oh, woe is me, I'm so helpless, I'm this and that and that, almost like someone with Munchausen, right? And they're seeking it's more, those things are more complex than just that, but this is involved, right? Beyond just that, that's a proper severe psychological disorder. But a lot of people that play the victim role in order to get attention and get things like that, because they want attention, they crave attention and stuff like that, and when they get away with it, it's like, it's also why people become like kleptomaniacs as well. They like to steal because it gives them a sense of excitement and all that sort of thing, and so that's why they do these sorts of things. It's one of the big reasons behind a lot of these things. And what makes a person do one thing versus another thing depends on a very, very complex set of psychological things that you can only assess from person to person. So today we're just going to look at the basic things. Now, for those of you who are interested, I want you to have a go here. There's a place called 123test, 123test.com. All right, and you will just type in Google 123test.com personality test, and it'll come up. Okay, so this is what it looks like. All right, Big 5 personality test. And what it will do is it will give you all the instructions, etc., etc. And you've got five dimensions. So, from strongly disagree all the way to strongly agree on the statement. So to give an example, I'm a warrior, not a like social justice warrior or Conan the Barbarian warrior. I'm a warrior. Do I worry a lot? So you can either be strongly disagree, somewhat agree. So you either worry a hell of a lot or you don't worry at all, right? So strongly disagree or strongly agree. So strongly disagree means I disagree, I'm not a warrior at all, or strongly agree, I worry all the time. Okay, or in the middle, I'm neither here nor there. So for someone like me, I am between. So strongly disagree, I'm between these two, for example, right? I'm not the type of person that worries about stuff very much at all. Okay, it's just not one of the things I do. And so I would answer either that one or that one, depending on when I'm doing. I have done these tests before, and I'll actually show you my results whilst I'm explaining things, right? I make friends easily, so for me will be one of those two. I make friends very, very easily. I have a vivid imagination, and so on and so forth. And you do the test. Now what will happen is the test is free. Okay, so the test is free. If you do this, it'll come up, but you can also pay for a more in-depth analysis. So the same test. So when you complete the test, at the end of the test, it'll come up and it'll give you the free version of your test. Now, the free version of your test is a very simplified version. You get the very basic breakdown of what your Big Five personality is. But if you pay for it, it'll give you a much more in-depth analysis, which can be very, very helpful. I think on this website, if you're paying in pounds, it's about £12, £13, something like that. However that translates to you wherever it is you are in the world. Over here in the UK, it's about £13 roughly, and you get the full thing, and you get a whole profile, and it all runs down, and it tells you all the bits and pieces you need to know. And so there it is. Now, once you've done that, you will find that when you do the test and it comes up, you will have 5 traits. The traits we're going to focus on today are the traits conscientiousness and neuroticism. Okay, conscientiousness and neuroticism. Those are the ones you want to look for if you are concerned about whether you are prone to addiction or not. Okay, so we're going to have a look here. Let's get a quick description. Conscientiousness, right? Conscientiousness, one of the 5 traits of personality. A person scoring high in conscientiousness usually has a high level of self-discipline, okay? And that's very, very important. These individuals prefer to follow a plan rather than act spontaneously, and they are methodic planners, etc. They persevere, usually make them highly successful, and so on and so forth. High conscientiousness means a person is responsible and reliable, right? However, individuals who scored a person can be compulsive perfectionists, workaholics, and so on and so forth. They might also be seen as boring and inflexible, and so on and so forth. Right. So there is a difference. Now we need to explain this. There is a difference. There is a difference between a impulse, right? Impulsion, an impulse, and a compulsion, right? An impulse is something that comes from within you. You want to do it, right? I want to have sex. I want to eat. I want to what? That's an impulse, right? A compulsion, when you are compelled to do something. It's almost like having something. It's almost like having something at the back of your mind telling you you must do this or the world will fall apart. Okay, so every trait has its pros and cons. Every single one, and if you are extremely high in conscientiousness, you might suffer from compulsive issues like obsessive compulsive disorder, where you have something in your mind that tells you, I have to do this, So a compulsion is not necessarily something you want to do. It is something that you have to do, right? So it's like when you compel another person, like when you blackmail, you blackmail someone. They don't necessarily want to do something, but you're forcing them to, right? Whereas an impulse, it is something you want to do, right? And usually at the end of that, there's a dopaminergic reward that comes with it. Okay, so not as with everything, there are pros and cons, right? But today we're talking about addiction, and addiction is a problem of impulse control. That's what addiction is. Addiction is primarily a dysfunction of impulse control. So if you're following this, right, you'll find that then someone with an impulse control problem will be very low in conscientiousness. So basically when they get that urge to do something, right, they don't have the internal resources of self-discipline and self-control in order to say, no, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to sort the issue out in a better, more rational, more reasonable way, right? And that is a very, very a big distinction between people. So you'll find the vast majority of people who are out there who are homeless, obviously not all, but the majority, if you look at the demographics and you look at the studies, the vast majority of people who are homeless, who are addicts, who are on the side of the road, who are having a lot of these issues, are people who are very, very low in conscientiousness, almost across the board, right? Are people who are low in conscientiousness. And so there is a paper that came out a while ago in the Plus One, where what they did is they went throughout the UK and they took all of the different boroughs in the UK, and they did a personality trait test. They took a sample size of the population within a certain area, right? And and to find out, let's say like London, what's the average personality profile in London, for example, and Birmingham and Manchester and all these kinds of places. And the interesting thing is, I took that, right? I must maybe do a video on that. I took that information and I went and I looked at those same boroughs and compared the crime statistics with with the personality profile, and it correlates beautifully. It correlates beautifully. All the higher the crime, the lower the people were in both conscientiousness and agreeableness. It was really quite remarkable. Really quite remarkable. And all the places where there's a lot of business, where there's a lot of industry, like London, right? So if you go to London, a lot of business, a lot of industry, a lot of banking and all that sort of thing, all the universities and all that sort of thing, as you would expect, the average level of conscientiousness in London is very high. Okay, so that was a very interesting paper to read and to go through and compare it with the crime statistics and all these kinds of things. So very important, these kinds of things to understand. So if you are low, so if you do the personality test, or if you're wondering about your children, give them the personality test, and you will look at the personality, and if they're low in conscientiousness, you will know that you need to concentrate more on this particular child to make sure that they're disciplined and all these kinds of things. So these parenting techniques where you allow children to do whatever the hell they want, it's idiotic. You're setting them up for failure, right? Teach them the value of being disciplined, of being orderly, of making plans and all these kinds of things. And you help the child balance. A balanced personality is, even if you are low or high in something, right? You want to balance your personality out so that you have a greater toolkit or in your personality in which to go out into the world and be successful. So for those of you who are interested, and to give an example, I'll use myself, right? So conscientiousness, I'm moderately high myself. So this is the results of my particular test, right? Moderately high. So I'm the 63rd percentile of conscientiousness, right? Measure of obligation, attention to detail, hard work, persistence, cleanliness, efficacy, and adherence to rules, etc., standards and processes, and so on and so forth, right? I'm at the 63rd percentile. So 63rd percentile means that if you take 100 people, I will be more conscientiousness than 63 of them. Okay, that's roughly what it means on average. If you're in a group of 100 people, you will so in my case, my conscientiousness level is 63rd percentile. I am more conscientiousness than 63 out of 100 people. Okay, and the average in a population, right? So you will find here, if you look here, right, women are very slightly more conscientious than men. The mean percentile for women in general, in the general population, women and men, so women are higher at 51.5 on average, and for men on average it is 49.5. So this explains why on average men, you generally find more alcoholics with men, more criminals with men, and so on and so forth, is because, or more rule breaking, is because on average men are lower in conscientiousness than women are, right? So in my particular example, I'm well above average conscientiousness for men. So 63rd percentile versus the average. I'm even higher than in conscientiousness than the average woman is. Okay, which is quite interesting. So you get all these things. Now, conscientiousness breaks down into two things. You've got industriousness, right? Industriousness is how is basically a measure of your work ethic. So a person who is very lazy, who doesn't know how to hold down a job. Now here's the thing, right? You find a lot of people who are unable to hold down a job become depressed and sort of like living on benefits, etc. They become depressed, they start using drugs, they start using pain medication because they're depressed, they're frustrated, etc., right? So they start abusing alcohol, they start abusing drugs, cigarettes, and all these kinds of stuff, and it's a real problem. So you can see industriousness 77th percentile means I am more industrious than 77 out of 100 people on average. Okay, so I'm a hard worker. I've got good work ethic and so on and so forth. I've never had a problem holding down a job. And as you might guess, I've never had a problem with addiction, right? It doesn't mean I can't form bad habits, which are then difficult to break. But because of my personality, for me, breaking bad habits is a lot easier than someone with very, very low conscientiousness, right? So, and here's orderliness. So I'm actually very low, right? So to get right, so to get this score here of 63rd percentile, what you do is you take your industriousness score, right, and you add it to your orderliness score, right? You add the two, and then you divide it by half, and it gives you your overall conscientiousness score, right? So my orderliness is 41st percentile, right? Which means that I'm fairly disorganized. I struggle to, so even though I'm industriousness, I work hard and so on and so forth, I'm not a very organized person, right? It means I'm not very organized. I will tend to leave things lying around a little bit, and so on and so forth. And so my orderliness is average. So I'm of average orderliness, and so on and so forth. And again, women, here we go. So women are more orderly than men, right? So men, the average is 45.5. So I'm 41, so I'm just lower than average. And for women, it is 54.5. So this explains why women in general tend to be the organizers, generally speaking, whereas men are not. And then if you look here, right, and industriousness, here we go, industriousness again, right? Men are higher in industriousness than women are, which is why men generally start businesses. This is usually why you see men at the head of industry, all right? Because men are on average higher than in industriousness than women. So on average, you're going to see that men are at the head of industry more often than women are. But because women are higher in orderliness than men are, you will usually find that women on average tend to be the organizers. So they're the event coordinators, the secretaries, the personal assistants, and so on and so forth. And that's just basically sort of where it breaks down. Okay, so a person who is very, very low in conscientiousness and will be so if you are sitting, if your conscientiousness is, well, let's go back to the beginning. If your conscientiousness is so, the lower in conscientiousness you are, the higher your risk for being unable to have any impulse control, and so the higher your risk of getting addicted to something if you are not careful, right? So if you are sitting, if your conscientiousness is, I would say, 45 percentile or lower, just don't touch anything that could possibly cause an addiction, and be very, very careful in everything in your life. Be vigilant. Am I overdoing this? Is it becoming an obsession? Am I struggling to control my impulses here? It's really, really, really pays to be vigilant about this stuff. And if you find that for whatever reason you're not managing to hold down a job, your house is a mess, and so on and so forth, you will find then this is why, right? This is why, and you have to practice. You are going to have to work a lot harder than the average person if you're very low in this trait to be organized and be disciplined and stuff like that. I would say maybe take up some martial arts or something that will help teach you to be disciplined and all that kind of stuff. Go out and do whatever is necessary to help you be more disciplined. Really is a very, very necessary thing to do, and you're going to really struggle. So that is why when you see like people like who are drug addicts and stuff like that, if they're very, very low in conscientiousness, then generally speaking they struggle to hold down jobs. They're very unreliable people. They break their promises. They say they're going to do things and they don't do them. And if you go to their houses, their houses are upside down and all that kind of. It's quite a disaster, right? Now conversely, you do get people who are very high in conscientiousness who are also addicts, right? So for example, you will find like someone who is working in Wall Street, right? He's a stockbroker or something like that, and you will find that they get addicted to certain substances like performance enhancing substances. So their addiction is driven by their need to perform at a very, very high level. But you will find it's not necessarily an addiction. It's something they fall into or become dependent on because they're trying to compete. But if taken out of that environment, they would no longer need necessarily rely on that sort of thing. So it's a little bit of a more subtle issue there, sort of thing. Right, now that's conscientiousness done. If you are low in conscientiousness, there's a good chance that you've got an addictive personality, you've got impulse control problems. So you will tend to be the type of person that speaks before you think about things, or does things before you think about them. That'll land you in a lot of trouble. You're unreliable and so on and so forth. It can be very, very difficult. So don't try your best to avoid bad habits and addictive substances, food substances. You're gonna have one hell of a time, if at all, to remove yourself from that addictive cycle. It's pretty savage. So that's one thing to concern yourself about. Now the next trait that we're going to talk about is neuroticism, right? So the next one that is very, very important is a trait called neuroticism. So let's have a look here, right? Neuroticism / emotional stability. Now, earlier on, you will remember that I spoke about feeling sad, feeling anxious, feeling fearful, feeling frustrated, so on and so forth. All of those negative emotions stem from where you sit on the neuroticism trait personality profile, right? So if you are high, this you need to understand that if you are very high in neuroticism, it means that you are more emotionally unstable. That means it is a lot easier to offend you. It's a lot easier to make you feel anxious. It's a lot easier to stress you out, and so on. You worry for nothing. You will worry even if you have no. You will worry if you have nothing to worry about, because you will be worried that you're forgetting about something you should be worrying about, and that is the neuroticism is an indicator of how much of how frequently you will experience emotional pain states, and as a result you will then seek out, right? So if you are very low, here's the thing, if you are very, very low in neuroticism and also low in conscientiousness, you will then have a good chance of not necessarily becoming an addict, because you are not experiencing emotional pain states very often, and therefore you will have no need to seek out substances to make yourself feel better. But if you are both low in conscientiousness and high neuroticism, then you're gonna you're gonna struggle. And I'm sorry to say, but you are really, really, really going to struggle. And so you get people who are very, very low, like 15th percentile, 11th percentile, 10th percentile in conscientiousness, and then up in like the 80th percentile or more in neuroticism, and those people are just they can barely function at all in a normal society. They're just useless virtually, right? It's rough. It's really, really rough. That's getting the short end of the stick. Now, these things are not deterministic, and a lot of them, if you cannot, a lot of that comes down to crappy parenting, right? A lot of parents, they see these things in their children and they will indulge them. They won't discipline them. They do not give the children. This is your responsibility as a parent, is to understand the personality of your child and give your child the internal resources to balance out the extreme parts of their personality. That's your responsibility, so that they have the resources to go out and be successful, right? So if you find that you have a child that's like this, and most people, so for example, most parents, if they have a neurotic child, they will indulge the child by then overprotecting them. That is the worst thing you could do for a neurotic child. A neurotic child needs to learn how to be brave. And if they don't learn that, they're going to be completely pathetic when they're older. And it's the same thing with a child who is low in conscientiousness, right? You get parents who will have lazy children, and they will do literally nothing, right? You have these helicopter mothers that go and pick up after their children. It's like, no, it's the worst thing you can do. If your child is low in conscientiousness, you make them clean their room, you pick up their toys, you give them the discipline, right? This business of doing everything for your children, you are ruining your child's life. It literally is what you're doing, right? Instill the discipline, instill the emotional resilience, and all these kinds of things. So neuroticism is emotional stability, refers to a person's ability to remain stable and balanced. So for example, let's say I'm feeling happy, right? For whatever reason, if I'm unstable in my personality or high neuroticism, it means that almost anything will ruin my good mood, right? And you get people like that, right, where their good moods are short-lived because they're high neuroticism. Literally anything can spoil their day, anything can ruin their day. It's really quite terrible. So an individual who is high in emotional stability or low in neuroticism will be stable and calm, so they're fairly chilled out people. They're not neurotic, and they don't have knots in their neck and migraines caused by all the tension and so on and so forth. An individual high neuroticism is emotionally reactive, so they're volatile. So your social justice warriors who are like triggered about and offended about everything under the sun, the people those people are generally speaking very, very high neuroticism, and which is why you find that that side of the world, they want to encourage, for example, abortion, because people who have no self-control and who are high in neuroticism are very likely to get addicted to something like sex, and sex produces unwanted children. Therefore abortion is a good solution out of that, right? And so on and so forth. And people who are in your social justice movements, who are on the left, they tend to be very, very emotionally, they're very creative, but they tend to be emotionally unstable, which is why it's very, very easy to offend them and very easy for them to just go off on tangents and pick it and go completely insane, because there's very, very little. And here's the interesting thing is, a lot of people have noticed that most social justice warriors are basically people who are utterly useless, pathetic individuals who don't have a job. And this is why, okay? No one likes to work with someone who's emotionally reactive and all that kind of thing. And by the way, if you're running a business, it would be a good idea for you to know, give personality trait tests to your potential employees so that you know what you're getting, right? Whether it would be a discriminatory thing or not, I don't know. But yeah, you could save yourself a lot of headaches if you didn't employ someone who had emotional instability, you know, like this, who but again, that you'd have to do it intelligently, because if a person suffers from depression, for example, they will score high in neuroticism, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a bad thing in the workplace, because they could still be very high in conscientiousness. For example, like if I make an example, my wife, she suffers quite severely from depression, but she's very, very high in conscientiousness, which means that her work is flawless. Her work is absolutely flawless, and she has that discipline to not allow her depression to actually interfere with her work and all that kind of stuff. So there's that balance there, right? So there's the neuroticism trait for you. A person who's emotionally unstable, who feels depressed often, who feels frustrated often, who feels angry often, who feels sad often, who feels lonely often. All these things are emotional pain states. So if a person is scoring high in neuroticism or emotional instability, then this individual is going to be significantly more prone to go and look for anything to make themselves feel better, whether it is food. Like you will find that so you can tell that if someone is self-medicating, right? The next time you're in a shopping mall, a shopping center, like a food thing, right? Look at their trolley, right? If their trolley is full of high fat, high sugar, high carbohydrate foods, there's a pretty good chance this individual not only has impulse control, but they're probably self-medicating, right? It's quite likely they're self-medicating. People who always walking around with a donut, with a packet of chips, with biscuits, etc., etc. They're probably self-medicating. There's probably an issue there. Now, you will also find so that's how you can tell. Now, to have a look, just to get again, just to give you an example, if you have a look at my trait over here, neuroticism, I'm very low. So I've never had a problem with addiction. I've never had a problem with addiction's never been a thing for me, right? I've never liked the taste of alcohol. I've never been bothered. I actually did smoke when I was in high school. I smoked for a few months and then I was like, ah, this is garbage. I put it down, never touched a cigarette again. And I did it just to try. I thought, oh, what the hell? I tried it. Never had an addictive personality at all. And you can see, one of the reasons here is why my neuroticism is very low. I'm in the 11th percentile, which means that out of 100 people, I am less neurotic than 88 of them. Okay, very, very low in neurotic. Well, actually not very low, low, right? Let's be correct. Low in neuroticism. So one of the things that pushes my neuroticism up a little bit is because I've got Tourette's. Okay, and Tourette's is a bit of an issue there, right? I'm actually surprised it's so low considering the fact that I have Tourette's. Because Tourette's Tourette's comes with comorbidities of depression and things like that, and I do sometimes have dips in my mood and stuff like that every now and then, even though I would never actually get a full-blown diagnosis of someone who's suffering from depression, etc., etc. Although I probably would if I didn't exercise and I didn't have a job and all these kinds of things. I probably would get at least a circumstantial type of depression sort of thing. So my neuroticism is very, very low. Um, and yeah, so so people who make a mountain out of a molehill, for example, is someone who's emotionally unstable, right? Everything is an issue. So for me, I'm very chilled. I'm very easygoing. You know, I'm you do you, I do me. Kind of thing. And then so one thing that is very, very it doesn't say it here, or does it? Let me have a quick squiz. Right, so it doesn't seem to say it here. Here's an interesting. So yeah, so here's a little bit here. Females tend to be higher in neuroticism than males. The typical woman is higher in neuroticism than 60% of the general population of men and women combined. So basically, what it means, if you randomly select out of, so you walk down the street and you randomly take men and women, right? And you placed a bet, right? So I'm going to bet that the woman is, and let's say you placed your bet on the woman always being the most neurotic. So you place a bet, she's more neurotic than whatever random guy I pick. You will be right 60% of the time, right? And so that's on average. So women are actually quite significant. This is actually the most significant of all the personality traits. Neuroticism is the trait in which men and women diverge the most from each other, is in neuroticism. As you saw with the others, men and women are separate, but they only differ by a small margin, right? Only by a few percentile points. Whereas when it comes to trait neuroticism, women are actually substantially more neurotic than men are, which explains why then women suffer from depression significantly more than men, and why women inherit the label of being crazy quite readily, right? So a lot of women, a lot of men are like, man, that woman's crazy, and that's why, because there's a lot of emotional volatility there. And women are more prone to stress and all these kinds of things, more prone to anxiety, more prone to fear, and all of these kinds of things. So that's a big trait that really hinders women quite a lot in their lives. If they're very fearful, very anxious, very worried, these pain states and all that sort of thing are quite significant. But interestingly enough, on average, women seem to be addicts less than men, because again, on average, this is balanced out with conscientiousness, because on average women are higher in conscientiousness than men are. So men on average tend to be, but so these things sort of balance themselves out. And let me just close this here. Oh. So that's sort of where we sort of sit on this particular issue. There is that difference between them, and so as you go out into the population, you see these things. But neuroticism is a big issue. So you've got withdrawal. So myself, my withdrawal is 40th percentile, 40th, fourth, so extremely low withdrawal. I'm not the type of person to withdraw into myself at all. And that has to do with I'm very very high extrovert. So you know and so people will withdraw, and this is what you find with people who become addicts and things like that. They withdraw into themselves, right? They shut themselves off from the rest of the world. It's just them and their bits and pieces, and that's it, right? That's all they want. um and which is why it can be so difficult to help addicts, because they'll shut you out, sort of thing. So an addict would typically, in withdrawal, would typically be significantly higher over here. So if you find that you're very very high in withdrawal, be careful. You are the type of person who will reject help, right? And that's a problem. People want to try help you, or trying to give you advice, and then someone who's high in withdrawal or high in neuroticism is the type of person that, oh, I don't need your help, get lost. They won't actually talk to people, which is why it's so difficult to help addicts and sort of thing. Volatility. So for me, my volatility is quite high. Right. So basically means I don't mind telling people to piss off. Right. It does. So it's low, moderately low. So this means that I can go off at you, right? So this then sort of goes in line with my high extroversion, high assertiveness. So I'm a very assertive person, which means that if you cross a line, I've got absolutely no issue blowing up at you. I'm also low in agreeableness, so I'll blow up at you, right? So 29th percentile volatility. So, but I'm less volatile than 70 of 100 people. So generally, if there's a group of people and something's going on, I'm less likely to kick off than most people, right? In terms of start shouting and carrying on. So I tend to, even if I'm really annoyed or really really ticked off, I keep it to myself. I'm more likely to have a conversation rather than tell the person to, well, go jump in the lake, sort of thing. I'm more willing to negotiate and have a, I don't lose my composure very easily, but moderately low. So the possibility is still there. But someone who's an addict, generally, who's prone to addiction, you'll find volatility is, again, it's way up here, right? You find they're very paranoid. Sort of looking at them like, oh, what you looking at? And they want to start, it's very very, with someone who's low in volatility, very very easy to think for things to kick off with someone like that. They flip their lid like that. No issue. Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the story. That is the story. I hope this helps you out. Your personality traits, right? Go to that website, 123.com, 123test.com. Check it out. Do your personality trait test. Do it for your family. If you're concerned about your family, if you're concerned about anyone, do the trait test, and you will see there, in an objective way, am I or anyone else prone to these kinds of things. You see it in your children. That you can do a personality trait on your kids, right? As when they're just starting to get into their teenage years, or even before, right? Because our personalities are pretty stable over our lifetime. They do change. So, for example, at puberty, men and women tend to diverge quite a bit. So for women, the neuroticism goes up quite a lot, whereas for boys, the assertiveness tends to go up. So there are changes there, but generally speaking, the personality traits are very very stable over our lifetime, because generally speaking, we are pretty much born with our personality traits as they are, and then our upbringing. People talk about nature versus nurture. So our nature is pretty much set, but then our nurture will then determine on how we express these personalities, and whether and if we have extremes in our personality, our nurture will determine whether we mitigate them or whether we completely go off the deep end with them, which is why the nurture is so important. If your child is low in conscientiousness or high on neuroticism, you need to be very aware, because that child is a recipe for disaster, right? If you don't have the discipline, have a decent family environment, and give them the internal resources to cope with disappointment and cope with anxiety and all these kinds of things, you're going to set them up for disaster. They're going to ruin their lives, and it's going to be your fault, right? A lot of the opioid problems and things that we have these days is in a large part because the family unit is broken, and even those family units which have parents, the parents are retards. They have absolutely no idea what the hell they're doing with their children. They follow every parenting imbecile fad that there is out there in the world, and they completely ignore how that there is a way to do things and there is a way not to do things. And obviously, because the personalities are different, each child will need something different, right? You need to get to know each one of your children as individuals and give each one what each one needs, and help them understand that you're not showing favoritism or this or that. You need to understand each one is different. Some need more of this and some need more of others. And when you understand your children, you'll know how to deal with them. It's that simple. You'll know who needs more of what, and so on. And for, like, even like talk about conscientiousness, you always have that one child who's more helpful and the other one's a bit lazy, who you've got to really nag him in order to get doing things immediately. And one is more conscientious than the other. So and that's how things need to go. So the one needs maybe a little bit more encouragement. It's that simple. But if you're ever worried, am I potential for addiction? My child, anyone potential for addiction? Do the personality profile. The low conscientiousness, high neuroticism, that's a warning bell. It's don't even never touch alcohol. Don't ever touch any drugs. Just stay away. Stay away from these things, because it will end your life. Totally. I've seen my friend and many other people go through this. It is a disaster. They will run themselves into the ground. So it's better. So this idea, I'm going to allow my children to experiment, is idiotic and irresponsible, right? They, there's a way to do things and a way not. And this idea, I'm going to let my children experiment in front of me. All you're doing is creating an addict under your damn nose. You're an idiot, right? So, ladies and gentlemen, that's it, right? Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you very much, and take it easy. Goodbye.